Welcome to our InPower coffee break today, where we're going to be talking about women and STEM. We're going to talk about what STEM is because many of us think we know science, technology, engineering, and math, but it's not quite that straightforward. I'm Dana Theus, founder and president of InPower Coaching, and I've got Mary Brodie here who does all kinds of things with InPower Coaching, including a wonderful blog post on this topic, women in STEM, that will give her a chance to shine not only in terms of her understanding of the issue, but her own experience. So in these conversations, we cover a variety of topics, but always from the perspective of how to be more empowered in the workplace and in your life, how to survive and thrive in your life and in the workplace. And we cover that both from the perspective of, the individual, the manager, the leader, and also the organization that's trying to create an empowered workplace. And today we'll be looking at it through the women's leadership lens in particular, because bringing women into the workplace is shown in a variety of ways to make a more successful organization, more successful workplace. And because STEM fields are so important to our economy and the world, this is an interesting area where there's a lot of progress yet to be made about how we can bring women into STEM fields, both to help the women, but also to help the business and the economy and the world. So, Mary, you have done a lot of thinking on this, and I have too over the years. Both of us come from technology fields and backgrounds and industries, but from a little bit different perspective. So why is this interesting to you, and why did you choose to write on it in that post? And I think you do other things in this area too, other than just write blog posts.
Yeah. Because I do work in STEM, but that's where I think where some of this stuff kind of started, at least for me, is that what's the definition of STEM? And I think that's the big gap comes to the T, right? We all tend to focus on the S because you can define the S, right? And the E, which there's no women in E. I originally started off as an engineer, so, I can see why there's no women in E. I know that sounds bad.
Did you leave because there were no women in E? In engineering?
No, I left because I didn't like it. Which I think is some reason why some women leave, because it's kind of right? I hate to say it. I know, and even my guy friends who were when I was in engineering school with, they left too. They all left engineering. Like nobody wants to stay in engineering.
Actually, my son wanted to be an engineer, and he doesn't anymore.
See? Anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So go on. Why is
so then you have the M which is mathematics, which I know there are women in mathematics, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the T is always I know there's even debates about what I do because I'll do the user experience side of things. And I have been told I'm either in design or I'm not in technology. And I've actually had arguments on Twitter with people telling me that I am not technical, even if I go more on the marketing side and when I get into marketing products, right? Technical products, people will tell me, "Oh no, you're not technical." I'm like, huh? I know more about the technology than some of the people use it sometimes. What do you mean? So it gets kind of interesting. I think it's an interesting balance. I see a lot of times in IT companies, a lot of women in the marketing department, and they take a 50-50 stance. Am I technical or not? And it's kind of interesting. Some will say they're not technical because they do marketing, and there's this perception, well, I do marketing or I do sales. But again, I've talked to salespeople who sell technical products, and they know sometimes just as much as the engineers know.
Well, and so you're raising a really interesting question there about, what is technical? Because there are people in marketing who they just look at numbers all day long.
Yeah, exactly.
they don't think they're technical because they can't, fix their computer, but they're very analytical. And do we sometimes get analysis confused with technology, maybe?
Well, I wonder if sometimes in the because of the way things are going with technology, right? And we all use technology. I think at one point it was, only a few people use those computers type of world, right? And you had your little workstation and all that jazz, right? Now everybody's got one, and in fact, it's your phone, right? Your phone is your computer. Everyone's got at least one, if not many. Mm-hmm. everyone is technical to some degree. You communicate technically. So it gets to blur this line of, I think, sometimes what is technical and what isn't technical, and how deep you go in understanding how some of this stuff works. Like, I've talked with some people who say they're not technical, but you get them started on how social media works or SEO works.
Right.
They understand Google's search engine. Like, I'm like, wait a minute, you're saying you're not technical, right? Like, what is that about? So.
Right. Yeah. And I think, talking about women, quote, and STEM or technology or whatever, we also have this story in society that, women aren't good at math. Girls aren't good at math, which of course there are studies that show girls are great at math and just as good as boys up till about middle school, when all of a sudden the social stories about being smart, start to hurt them. They start to, boys are less interested in them if they're a brainiac, and they feel under more peer pressure from other girls, not to be good at the math stuff, and so they start to back off their own self-esteem in general, but also specifically they start buying into the story. Well, I'm no good at math. I fell victim to some of that stuff. This was back before anybody really noticed gender differences. And I was fine at math. Geography gave me trouble, but I was great at algebra. And when I didn't have to take calculus, I'm like, yay! Looking back at it, I'm kind of curious whether I might have really enjoyed certain aspects of math. I don't know. I never tried. But I will tell you, so I worked at a lot of technology companies, and everybody who wasn't a technologist thought I was an engineer just because I understood systems thinking. Right. And the way systems communicate. Once I understood the systems aspect of any technology, I understood the basic dynamics of it, and I could communicate about that. And that didn't make me technical, but it made me good in technical discipline.
Yeah. I think there is that discouragement early on with girls in math. I think this follows on from the last conversation because I had all the male influence and they told me go for it. And I stayed in math. Right. And so for me, it was a different story. That's why I think I stayed more in the technical area. But even then I dropped out of the engineering side because, and even when I read these reports, like I was reading this report, I guess somebody did something in Europe about women graduating as engineers, and a lot of them have this perception they're going to go create all these new products, right, and do more product design, and they end up working in a plant. And that's what they started saying is like working in a plant isn't fun, right? And that's why I started realizing like the type of math I was doing and the type of science I was doing for mechanical engineering, didn't like it for other stuff. I can empathize why women would be why, a motivator for why women would leave if you're not working on something that's interesting. Right now with the stuff I work on is all innovation and news, and that's fun, right? That's the exciting part. So
right.
It's,
Well, I interviewed a woman very high up at NASA who, was an engineer and had kind of come through all, the things you're talking about that a lot of people go out of at various points in their education. They're like, this isn't interesting. I don't see how this is leading me to something that I want to do that's interesting. She kind of got through all those gates, mostly because she did find it interesting. Yeah. And she did say that the hardest part was when she was the only woman in the class, the physics class or the
that is hard.
The astrophysics class or whatever it was, she was kind of saying, well, the content was interesting. What I was studying was interesting. But boy, did I have to put up with a lot of other crap to be able to follow this. And I guess, I know plenty of men who don't find certain aspects of their field all that interesting or compelling, but they want to get past that. They want to move on into a leadership position in their organization. So they put in their dues, they pay their dues on the essence of the work so that they can start moving up and do the things they enjoy. And I think there's a lot of women who they're like, why would I want to do that? Why would I want to work in a place where I don't feel supported at all? And no aspect of this is interesting. And all I see is more headache. And I think they just, it's at some point you got to ask yourself, how bad do I want to just keep fighting?
Well, that's what I wonder sometimes because then are really different on how they socialize. And that's one thing I noticed.
With each other, you mean?
Yeah. And how that comes through to women. Because I know in some environments, women will be there and the men will talk to the women as they talk to each other, which can be kind of brutal. Just in general, because I've been in that. Like, I've thought that certain guys, we don't get along professionally. Come to find out, they had great respect and regard for me later. They talk like that to everybody. And I thought they were just being a rude, right? And that's just the way they communicate. And I wonder sometimes if that gets misinterpreted. I know being younger in engineering school, it was incredibly difficult to be one of, like, because women also, when they get a question, will sit and like, I wonder what the answer is. And they won't raise their hand unless it's right. And the guys, it's just a race for whoever gets their hand up first. And it could be a dumb answer. Saw that a lot. But it was a race for who got it up first, right? It was a whole different socialization process. And I wonder if that comes through at work too. And then it gets,
Yeah, I think that's true in a lot of different disciplines. But when you get into a situation where there's more of either gender,
it gets
then the gender pattern becomes what the majority is used to. And like what you're describing, for women that I know that have a lot of brothers, that's not necessarily uncomfortable for them, right? Because they grew up like that, and vice versa. There are men that I've worked with who had a ton of sisters who would just sit there and kind of roll their eyes as women talk like women talk, and even in a professional setting. And they didn't have the same kind of, reaction that those who aren't used to those communication patterns experience. So I think the fact that there are so many more men in the technical fields, that's probably much more prevalent. And so it creates a different kind of a problem for a woman who's the only one there or only one of two. And I do have to say, so there were some, and now I don't have data that explains this. I'm not aware of it, but there was a lot of progress being made in terms of women getting into technical fields and scientific fields, which is backsliding.
Yes.
Like the numbers are going down.
I believe the numbers that are still, most of them are, I believe, at 50-50. We get into fields like the medical profession, where it's slightly higher for women. And I think with psychology and the social sciences, it's much higher. We never talk about that. I find that fascinating. But in the social sciences, it's much higher for women. And then it comes to engineering, computer science, and environmental science. It's like women are at like somewhere between 25%, somewhere between 25 and 30%. It's like dismally low, and it's hard to get them up. I understand with computer science, because I'm closer to that, I can see why. Because it is a very solitary type environment. I think some of the movements made to have more collaborative product creation and development, that may start to change that. Yeah. I know the engineering one, again, I can see why. I mean, you're working in a plant. Ugh, who wants to be there anyway?
No, there are people who like that.
Yeah, 25% of them. No, I'm just kidding. I'm joking.
Well, I know the women in the sciences, and I'm talking about the, chemistry and biology and a lot of other non-quote technology sciences.
Yeah.
Those numbers have also been going down.
Yeah.
And again, you look back at it and it's like, what's the pipeline? The kids, whoever's going to go into the science has to be taking math and science in high school and not opting out at the first chance they get, like I did, right?
That's true.
I took the minimum amount of math and science that I needed, and then I stopped. And if you do that, then that means if you want to go into a scientific career later, you've got several years of pretty intense education you've got to make up for.
Yeah, there's like organizations like, I think it's Girls Who Code, and some other organizations to get girls interested in coding and get them engaged and involved. I know like here in Dallas, there was like a product hackathon type of thing. And there weren't very many women. I was like, every time I'd see a young girl, I call them a girl. I probably shouldn't because they're in their early 20s. But I would see one and I would go, oh my goodness, thank you for being here. And thank you, for sticking with it and not leaving. And I also, what the trend I noticed though is the teams that had women in them, the products were more thought through for how to use them. So they were a little more finished and polished for what you were experiencing versus the teams that had the guys only. Their products sometimes were quite rough. And I'd be like, I don't know, guys, you need a little more refinement. But the ones with the girls, there was a human element that was included, and it was pretty consistent. And you see it consistently too. I've noticed it in other hackathons as well. They'll think there's a different element that I think women bring to STEM in general, which I think is great, and we should have more of that.
Actually, so you're speaking to something that, I speak to quite a bit when I'm talking to women's groups, which is that it's not just, quote, STEM. One of the gender differences between men and women in leadership and in the way we approach things tends to be that we define success differently. And these are very broad generalizations, but they tend to hold up, which is that men are typically more focused on the quantitative results, and women tend to look at the quantitative and the qualitative, including the human element, as you're saying. So in a leadership capacity, women on the board or in the executive team are usually the ones that say, well, wait a minute, in addition to making our numbers or being able to put our numbers reports out, what's our customer satisfaction? What's our employee satisfaction? How do these human elements play into whether we're successful or not? And they tend to be the people at the table asking those questions. And there's research that shows that when those questions are asked and answered and factored in, that success is defined more holistically. Typically, the success is then more sustainable. It tends to, it's not just, systems are being put in place that then sustain the organization and help keep the numbers up over time. These are very broad generalizations, but it does tend to be true across different organization type and across different industry. And it's not that men don't care about people. It's that women tend to bring that issue forward more often. And then a joint, team of men and women can sort of factor all those things into success and is more successful at having a more holistic view of success. So the fact that you're saying this in a technical situation where people are going to have to use the results of the technology isn't necessarily surprising. It's very consistent with everything that, we see in leadership studies that have a gender component kind of across the board. One other thing to notice, I think, about STEM is that because of the studies that tell us that women's brains are just as capable of that women's brains are just as capable of handling technical subjects, up until a certain age, is that at every age, we are telling ourselves stories that can help us or not. I'm just realizing here we've lost some kind of signal connection. I don't know if it's me or Mary who has blipped out. I'll keep talking just in case it's me. If anybody else can hear me, maybe send in a chat and let me know. Mary's going to try to reestablish the connection here and see. Let's see. Okay, so Darlene can see me, so I'll just keep talking here, and hopefully Mary can come back in. So what I was saying was that I think that in all industries, in all jobs, in everything, these stories we tell ourselves that either enable us or don't enable us to be successful, they're operating for everybody in all fields. What this data about the difficulty that women wanting to get into STEM fields or succeeding once they're in it what it shows us is the importance of those stories we tell ourselves early on, especially as, when kids are forming their identity around middle school and high school. Am I smart? Am I good at math? Can I hold my own with a bunch of boys or a bunch of girls? Those stories that we're telling ourselves at that very young age is what tends to shape our identity. And it also shapes what we want to do, what we believe we can do, but also what we want to do with our lives. So for those of us who are around children, we really need to pay attention to what the stories we're telling ourselves that the children are observing, and what we're encouraging the children to be thinking about themselves, because it's actively shaping them. And also, like Girls Who Code and the Girl Scouts is now taking on responsibility for trying to address this issue too. We have to recognize that they're looking at this over the pipeline of human lives, and we need to, sort of, for our girls in particular, bring in support at every stage that the girl is going to be open to and interested in. And that's a person by person, parent by parent, child by child challenge, I think. Mary, you're back.
Yes. I don't know what happened. That was bizarre. But thank you for the troubleshooting advice, guys, because that helped me figure out what was wrong. Yeah, it's Dana, you're raising a lot of great points about, what we need to do to help support girls when they're young, so they don't leave, and we keep them engaged with science, technology, and mathematics. One
thing I wanted to say now that you're back,
yeah.
was that, so part of what I said when you were gone was that what you observed about how the teams that had girls on it, tended to put more user-friendly stuff out.
Yeah.
One of the things that I recognize in leadership that I think important to girls, right, is that girls do have some natural proclivities to define success in human terms. We have to encourage that. We have to tell the girls and the boys that usability matters, that the way this is, whatever they're producing, the way it actually benefits human society matters, because a lot of times girls aren't getting those messages. So they think, well, I care about the human component, but obviously nobody else does.
Right.
And then they start to shut down because they're just not being encouraged for what they naturally think is important.
Yeah. And that's what I see now with, a lot of the technology things, like, is usability actually, in the STEM field? Is it a STEM field? I always now that's where I start discussions like, what is STEM? Like why don't we all define it first? Because there's also fields like accounting. I think that's like a borderline field. Some people consider it a mathematics field. Some people don't. You've got all the stuff that we do to create products, like online products. Some of those things, again, is QA a technical field? I think so. Some people don't. Business requirements, like product management, some people consider that technical, some don't. And I think that makes a difference. And I think that's where we start looking at, I think also how we judge what is STEM, right? And I think we exclude women, and sometimes, and what they're good at, like what you're talking about. Like if they're adding that human value to a product, did we just exclude them?
If we're not defining STEM to include those fields that have a human element to them. Right.
We've just taken it all away. Again, it goes back to, in STEM, do we define, do we include the social sciences? Right. I think it's ridiculously high. It's something like 70% are women, some jazz. And we don't talk about it.
Yeah, I would believe that. And that's kind of getting beyond our purview for defining these things in terms of the research that's done. But I think that what I'm picking up here is that the themes are very common, is that the what we think we're good at determines what we try to get better at, right?
That's true.
And women bring a lot of gifts related to factoring in human elements, but also just, as I said, holistic definitions of success. Women tend to look beyond very narrow definitions to a broader definition of success. and that often is the human element. But if we want women to succeed, we have to define success broadly, because that's what they care about, And if that's in a chemical field, a set of, developing chemical or pharmaceutical products, that may look differently than how it would in technology and creating an app for your phone. But both should matter. And I think we need to tell our girls that the way they define success is important. They need to stand up for that, and that it's okay, instead of just railroading and like, no, that's not what success looks like, because that's how a lot of us get shut down. And that's true for boys too, by the way. That shuts down not just, interest in, quote, technology or STEM. It shuts down their interest in innovation of any kind. And really what we're talking about here is innovation. And going back to, men are socialized younger to take more risks. So they're encouraged to be innovative in a way that women often aren't. Girls often aren't, because they need to be perfect.
Well, yeah. And you're bringing up too of like women entrepreneurs and the challenges they face. That's another whole ball of wax that gets kind of peripheral to STEM and women creating new products. And there aren't a lot of them. And that's part of the reason why we will sometimes hear, I think, women don't get VC money. Well, VC money goes to product companies. Doesn't go to a service company. Most women start service companies, right? And if women had more, like if there were more women creating more products, I think it would be a little different.
Yeah, I don't know the number specifically. I mean, most of what I read about VC funding, and Al is trying to get in.
I know. Yeah, he's trying again. Yeah.
hopefully he can get in here before we close out. But there's gross generalizations in all of this stuff. What I have heard both from female entrepreneurs who are seeking, also from some VCs themselves, is that, and my own experience in the VC world is to get funded, fundamentally people have to believe what you're doing is important and will sell in the marketplace.
Right.
And a lot of times investors go on their own experience, right? And sometimes they don't have the experience that gives them insight into whether even a product that's being developed by, a woman and marketed is going to be successful. And so sometimes there's that basic, we think this is all analytical. Oh, there's a business case. You've got hard numbers. And it's like, well, no, when it comes to funding, you can have all the numbers in the world. If the funders don't believe you're going to be successful, they don't believe there's a real market need, you're not going to get the money.
Right. There's, I think when it comes to product companies, there's just, looking at the numbers, there just aren't many women doing it. Like it's something like really low, like something like below 30% of the businesses started by women actually are about products, and like 60% of them jazz is like services.
Yeah, I don't find that hard to believe. And frankly, from an investor standpoint,
they prefer women companies. They love them.
They love what?
Women. They like one of the guys from Shark Tank was like, if I'm presented with investing in a woman-owned company or a man-owned company, they'll take the woman-owned company.
That's not probably the average. But what I was going to say is, from an investor standpoint, investing in a product has a lot more leverage and potential upside for your money than a service company. That's just the way the way that the company structure matters.
Right. So VCs won't consider a service company at all, period. Yeah. They just won't. It's not even worth going.
and that's because VC money has different requirements on it than other kinds of money does. They have to be able to flip it within, a certain number of years at a certain percentage and out, or else it's not worth their investment and the risk that they're taking. That's just the way that business works. And really what it comes down to is there's a lot of businesses that succeed without VC funds. Yes. More and more. It's like, and I know plenty of women, myself included, who are like, you know what? If I don't have to go get any investors, that's the best possible scenario.
There's an organization that exists, Golden Seeds. They invest in women-owned companies. And that's where I was talking with one of the women from Golden Seeds a while back. And she was talking about how many, like all the people in their portfolio, they're all technical, right? She works mostly with women who are in like biomed and biochemical and all that stuff. And they're creating drugs and stuff like that. And they have such a long turn and they need the money because they're they've got trials, right? So they got to fund their trials.
Right.
And because that's where her perception of like women in science, she's like, oh no, there's a ton. Like you should see all the ones we get, and they're good.
Good.
So it's out there. It's just, I think, we don't hear also about women who have successful business. That's a whole separate ball of wax, because then you could go down the road of the woman who had that company, the genetic company, the blood company. That was,
the TED Talk.
Sham. Yeah, it was a sham company to begin with. And but that's where we hear about that. We don't hear about the good ones, right?
Well, yes, but I mean, I think that's true. On the other hand, I think our definition of success is rather loose. Right. Most of the time we say, well, let's see, we'll talk about we'll talk about anybody who's successful if they make $1 bazillion, they don't ever have to work again. Right. They have millions of employees, they go public, or they sell out for $1 billion. That's what success looks like. True. Success, like just paying your bills and not going broke, and, actually having a product or service in the market. That kind of success just doesn't sound very sexy. And there's plenty of men and women who do that all the time that no one talks about. And this is when we look at millennials, the definition of success is changing. The millennial definition of success looks a little bit more like a lot of women's definition of success, which is they just want to pay their way through society without having to report to a boss. That's a different definition of success than I'm going to get investment, I'm going to sell this thing, and I'll never have to work again.
That's true. No, that's true. That's true. That's true.
So we're actually out of time here. We kind of wandered all over the place, and I think there's other topics in here we could easily continue on. In the
broad, man.
Yeah,
it's a broad topic.
It is, and actually, I would love to come back to the STEM topic if we could find some women who are in that field, or the entrepreneurial, people who've been going for investment and stuff. It'd be interesting to interview some of them about their perspectives and experience. I mean, ours is what it is, but it'd be great to make this kind of a theme. Continue to have this conversation. All right. Well, we have had another successful half-hour InPower coffee break. Thanks to those who joined us, and thanks for those who tried to get in, and apologies for whatever the technical issue was.
Yeah, that was weird.
You can pick up all the recordings and see future topics at coffeebreak.inpower.com. And you can also register for reminders there, so you can come sit in live with us in the future. And Al, sorry again, you didn't get in. Feel free to go to coffeebreak.InPowerCoaching.com. And you can participate in the conversation there on the blog post under this recording. Thanks again, Mary.
Thanks, Dana. I'll catch you later.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.